Welcome everyone to this week's Cast on the Future. First, I want to thank everyone for their patience. Well, I have shows coming on and off at various times. I'm kind of sorry, but the situation in my household with my husband's health and everything has been kind of up and down. But I'm doing my best to try to check in at least every couple of weeks. And once again, I decided this week to do another forecasting thread because this is the time of year when we often want to look at what's coming up in the next year. And this is not going to be my regular annual show where I really look at the world's trends in general. But I decided instead to do kind of another limited one, although we won't just read through December. I'm going to read through the end of February. But I'm going to be more specific than the last time, and I'm going to read on something I've been hearing a lot about, which is the world and some of the local area economic situations. Once again, these aren't necessarily facts, but the cards may give us some insights, the cards and runes, into what potential factors are out there. There's been a lot of concern all over the world about both the economy in the U.S. and in other places, partly based on things that are changing and decisions being made. So with that said, this may be kind of a longer show, so I want to get started. And the first thing I read about was just I took the whole world. So this is going to be really general because it's the whole world. And, you know, as I've said in the past, the wider net you throw, the less precise the cards and runes are going to be. But they can give us some ideas. And the way I phrased the question for this part of the readings was, what are the main energies and or events for the world economic situation between the middle of December 2015, which is when I'm reading, it's the 15th today, and the end of February 2016. So not quite, just 2.5 months more or less. Now, it looks to me at first glance with these cards that the next 3 months or so are going to be a time where new issues or individuals may suddenly pop up on the world economic stage. And that may be some powerful forces that are going to be seesawing back and forth. And it's making it kind of difficult to tell exactly worldwide the direction things are really going. Now, this first card for the whole world, which kind of sets the tone for this entire reading, is the Stranger. This is a new energy, person, entity, or even situation that comes into the picture during this time. And because it is the first card, that's what it kind of colors this entire worldwide reading. In fact, I think the whole time period may seem kind of a bit strange, as expected things may be delayed and things people are expecting to happen, but unexpected things that people don't think are about to come up will. This could make for some rather tiring and uneasy times for people, as everything just sort of gets this slog feeling to it, sort of like going through mud. And I think some of it's because of the strange energy and the results of that, what happens afterwards. Now, what's really interesting is the card after the Stranger is simply no. And it's part of what I mean about this is an uncertain and somewhat stressful time period. We don't get clear-cut answers to the questions of what's coming up, at least not on a worldwide scale, which is one reason I'm going to break things down and read for regions later in the show. But for now, the no card may indicate one of two things. And honestly, it's rather difficult to decipher which one it is. Though, maybe that's part of the point. Depending on the choices made during this time, we may have different outcomes. The no card, which simply again has the word no on it, can be a simple no something. In other words, something, the card on either before or after it is a no answer. If that is the case with the first card, then I have it backwards and there will be no stranger or nothing new coming into the picture. This is possible, it doesn't feel right to me, but I'm bringing it up because the potential for that is there and we have to keep that in mind. The no could be the following card, which in this case is the cave or depression card. In an economic reading, I usually find a cave card means either economic depression itself or people feeling a need to withdraw to the safety of their own caves. Sometimes we see this with a stock market downturn or even something like a bank run. But basically you get this feeling of wanting to run back to the cave and hide. But we now have a no cave or no depression as one possible meaning. The expected depression doesn't happen, at least not now, as possible. Or it could mean something more like no place to hide, or there is no safety, there is no cave. I'm honestly not sure which it is, but since the remaining cards and runes are also kind of balancing on a knife edge, I suspect the real situation may be kind of a tipping point that could go either way. Now, a little hint of things to come, given the extended readings that I will go into during another part of the show. I'm pretty sure that the cave card is about withdrawal and potential economic downturns, at least in some places, and not about a no depression, no cave. Unless, of course, it is the no place to hide. I'll go into my reasons more for that when we get on to the rest of the show, but I think you'll see it pretty clearly when we get there. No card may also actually be part of the depression, or no isn't just a lot of negative and oppressive energy, a negative time period, basically. It hasn't quite settled into place yet. One thing is certain, though. This is not a period for exuberance and wild enthusiasm. They just have no place in this reading. Worldwide, at least, this looks more like a time for Goldilocks or three bears to huddle around and eat porridge, rather than, jumping on Ferdinand the Bull and letting him run down Wall Street. It just really feels, this whole feeling of being bogged down in a swamp or something is just really all over this. The final two side cards also give hints and suggest directions issues may be coming from, but not exactly what they are. The first card is the Stars, which is about making connections, connecting dots and things coming together. Normally, this is a very positive card, and it could suggest that people are withdrawing and making connections between, say, the current economic situation and the issues of employment. In other words, they're starting to wake up. This is because the word card is the last of the side card deck here. This is a card with gears and wheels on it, and usually represents employment or work in an economic reading. But it can also be about anything that resolves around anything to do with jobs, like labor, management issues, banking investments, factories, unemployment, or improved employment. Pretty much if it has to do with mundane work, this card covers it. It also deals with spiritual work in different contexts, but I don't really think this is about spiritual work. I think this is about jobs and employment, among other things. So we have basically the potential of a likely new element, situation, entity, or person that comes into the world economic situation, and either tries to point the world towards a way to avoid having a depression or a no depression, and making connections to help increase jobs, or, sadly and more likely giving my other readings, the stranger or new situation creates issues that result in things going negative. That is, again, the no card. And something withdrawing from the scene. There's just a lot of negative energy with personal withdrawal, possibly in these cards, and a possible economic depression that just occurs when the dots come together and everything suddenly makes sense. Or at least we start understanding it. And again, that may become more clear later. So, what do the Cat's Eye Tarot cards have to add to this? This is our kitty cat deck. We have our usual two cards, and again, they kind of indicate that long slog period where a certain amount of patience and indirect intervention are likely to get better results than just trying to outright confront a problem. In other words, these are not things worldwide that you can just jump in there and fix, because they don't fix that easily. This is the message of the Strength card, which is our first card, and it shows a tiny kitten with his new friend, who is a very large dog. He's going to get more trust and affection by being rather low-key and not overreacting than he would if he was, running around and trying to be all hyper. He can both face his fears, because he's probably kind of afraid of the new doggy, but he makes a new friend, too, because by being quiet and kind of calm about it. This suggests that to get through this coming economic period worldwide, it would be best to be cautious. Again, this is no time for wild spending or investments, or any level, on any level, from the individual to the giant economic block here. This is the time to kind of hold back and sit on what you've got, and whatever you do, don't be risky if you can avoid it. The Ten of Wands also shows this bogged down and overwhelming feeling. This is the next card, which is another reason I really think the cave card is at least about withdrawal and a feeling of depression, even though may or may not be a full-blown economic depression yet, at least not worldwide. The card shows a very young cat, but he's just getting up there. He's probably his teenage cat. And he's just caught a very large snake. He's killed it, and he is the victor. He has won. It seemed like a really good idea at the time. It also seemed like a really good idea to try to take this snake and bring it home to show his people as a great prize. Those of you who have cats know they tend to bring us things like dead birds, dead mice, and yes, occasionally dead snakes to give to their human friends. There's debated reasons on why they do this, whether they see us as kittens who need feeding or hopeless hunters who need teaching, but in matter of fact, they do it. Anyway, this cat decides to do this. And in the process, he discovers that it's a very heavy snake, and he's not that big a cat, and he's trying to carry the thing up a very long flight of house steps. Keywords for this card are overextended, overburdened, and struggle. I can't think of a better list of words to describe a lot of the world economic situation as I read about it in the press lately, especially the overextended part. There are hints of pride and even hubris in this card, especially when the kitty insists on doing it all by himself. Sharing the burden really could make things a bit lighter, but he hasn't kind of evolved enough yet in his thinking to get any help. Because it would mean a loss of control and also kind of a loss of prestige. There's no directly correct answer here, but the cards fit right in with this kind of marching through mud that sucks your boots into the mire if you're not careful that this reading has. And, there may come a point when the kitty just can't carry the snake anymore. Finally, we have the Elk Rune. Algiz or Elhaj, depending on your version. It's a rune that often means divine protection, but it can also mean something that just has to kind of run its course before it stops. Elk, which are called moose in North America, are the largest creatures pretty much in the Norse landscape, and they were considered really powerful. They were really impressive beings. Well, to be protected by them is fantastic, and you can really see how they become this great protector. If the herd or even an individual moose decides to bolt or stampede or run, there really was and is very little to stop them once they get going. I mean, a human spear or a gunshot maybe, but in general, they're just going to keep going until they're ready to stop. I see this rune as both a warning to be cautious and patient when possible, but also to simply get out of the way, which is your best strategy. I've been in Sweden. I've seen moose come right in front of our car and nearly crash it. Now, there was nothing we could do but hope it missed it, which it did by about a second and a half. But basically, you just have to, if you can get out of the way, that's what you want to do, especially if things start to unravel or start to spin out of control. Finally, our last rune for this worldwide reading here is Nauthish. This is kind of concerning. Nauthish is need fire. It's the most ancient and most desperate way of making fire by rubbing two sticks together. You've probably seen, Boy Scouts try to do this. I've watched people do this, and even skilled people, it takes a little while. And for unskilled people, well, I once saw someone go for 3 hours and still not manage to light the fire. My rune deck, which I have a card deck of runes that I sometimes use for readings. I'm not using it today, but it has a lot of really nice illustrations. And it illustrates this rune with sailors set adrift in a sea in a tiny lifeboat. And there's a big wave about to hit them. It's that kind of desperation. So this rune also has that tinge of just, again, like some real desperation, need, or perhaps something catching fire that may not totally run its course during the period, but the fire is most certainly being lit, and it's lit at the most deepest and most ancient levels. So overall, worldwide, it looks like things may be kind of grim economically, but not yet as drastically as bad as some folks had feared. At least not by February. But things are not so great either. There are a lot of energies of despair, need in this reading, some strength and determination also, which is good. But this kind of push-pull between the energies that encourage people to run and hide, an energy that encourages people just keep on slugging through the mire, at least for the near future. That's really all you can do, is just keep plugging on ahead. Now, the Stranger card also suggests strongly that very soon something new will come into the picture. The color things like the hail strike a few weeks ago, we may not be able to see it yet, but we'll probably know when he, she, or it shows up. The fact that it's the first card, the Stranger, suggests he isn't far away. And thankfully, it doesn't feel, again, as dire as a hail strike before that. But on the other hand, it doesn't have to be really heavy. It does have that kind of heavy and weighted down feeling, so it doesn't feel like a really positive move. But I could be wrong. Hopefully, you know, there's all these cards have good and bad sides. So, you know, the Stranger could actually be something helpful. Whatever the Stranger is, it changes the situation. So all in all, this isn't a great time worldwide to start up a new company or open an investment account. But it's a good time to keep what you're already working on and be engaged with it, to hold on to what you have, and to just keep moving forward, even if it's very slowly, in the best way that you can. You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages. Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com, for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today? We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future. Okay, I ended up doing something I almost never do for these readings. I laid out the cards for all 3 major world areas, and then went away overnight to think about them and come back to do the write-ups that I'm using for my notes here. The other thing I decided to do was, because of the information that came out in these readings, I reversed the order that I actually read them in. And I'm presenting them from backwards from my original viewpoint. My thoughts had been, I was going to start with USA, move on to Europe, and then cover China as economic regions. But the results of these readings had given me pause, so I'm actually going to start with China as a foundational reading, because I think it may really be the key to some of what's going on here. And it provides some information on the worldwide stagnation and sort of mud crawl we saw in the first part of the show. Note my regions are general. For example, the U.S. can also include Canada, but probably not Mexico because it's part of Latin America, even though it's North America. So we're looking kind of at the U.S.-Canada axis. The EU thread intentionally covers related countries like Norway or Switzerland. It probably doesn't include Russia, but I was just trying for that economic bloc. And China also includes connected Asian economies like South Korea. But again, when I was reading, I was concentrating mainly on China when laying out the cards. I know that these regions don't cover the entire world, but I wanted to focus on 3 major economic areas that felt important right now. And I didn't want the show to be 5 hours long. I'll probably cover Russia and other readings in the future, but for now, let's just look up for China and the Far East because I think it's really important. And the way I phrased this question was, what are the main energies, events, and/or outlook for the economic situation, especially for China, but also for the associated Asian countries for the next 2.5 months or so, or basically mid-December 2015 to the end of February 2016. We want to cut it off at March because March kind of makes spring, and that tends to bring on new energies with it, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. Okay. So the very first card, the one that sets the tone for our Chinese economic reading, is destruction. Destruction is a very powerful card, obviously. And it would be the Tower of Destruction in a lot of actual tarot decks. In this deck, it gets its own card. Well, in a private reading, destruction can be a positive experience. For example, something that's causing a problem in a client's life needs destroying, or the destruction of an old building that you have to tear down the old one before you can build a new one. That's creative and good destruction. At the beginning of an economic reading like this, my hunch is it's about to be as bad as it gets, honestly. I mean, you can have creative destruction in economics. In fact, that's a term that I've noticed that some bankers and various people in the power structure use these days. But in general, most destruction is not all that creative, especially in this area. And of course, there are more cards that also lead me in the direction of thinking this is not that positive, but we'll get there in a moment. But just, okay, from the starting gate, we have the theme of things destroyed. Exploding. On fire. This card is full of torches, fighting, and violence. The card is obviously placed during the European Wars of Religion by the illustrator, and hints of violence and destruction based on, interestingly enough, conflicting ideas, religions, or ideologies. In the case of China, my hunch is that ideals and ideology are bound to economic reality, and the results are going to be explosively dangerous and destructive. The second card is the stars, which, if my listeners recall, is about making connections. Just from reading the news, I know there's a lot of things strung together that connects what passes for business in China, but it does this everywhere, but in China in a particularly strong way. It's like officially connected to everything from big banks to governmental oversight. And the government is got, like, it's very hard to tell where government ends and so-called private business begins. It's all kind of one big package of factories, shipping, party politics, everything. You get it. When I see this card, what I get is the destruction of connections themselves, or perhaps their resulting enterprises. But at least we know that the connections have something to do with the destruction. The other thing the stars often represent is dreams or reaching for the stars. And the destruction of dreams here as a theme also fits pretty nicely. The beast is our middle card. The beast is a red dragon, which could represent China itself. But unlike most Chinese dragons, this one is neither lucky nor happy. This beast dragon is all about the deepest, darkest, and most violent human emotions. It represents emotions that all people and societies have, but normally manage to keep under wraps as they grow up. They include anger, rage, lust, jealousy, and fear, to name a few. Seeing this card in the middle of a reading, again, is anything but comforting. Now, I want to point out at this point before I forget that when my husband looked at this or was talking to me about this, he also mentioned that Mao himself was a triple dragon, I assume astrologically. And therefore, he had a strong sense that this might be what's coming up in the rest of the reading. Some of this could be like kind of a war or a conflict over ideologies or a resurfacing of the old ideology. You'll see why when we get there, but I want to mention that in terms of the dragon. Just remember that Mao, or the founder of modern China, this is also his card. Now, one of the ways to read this destruction card, or the cards so far up to the beast, would be the destruction of dreams leads to uncontrolled emotional, angry, and fearful reactions. And that could include this possible reversal, attempt to go out to the old ways, or even an attack on the new ones. And, we're only on the third card here, and we've already got the destruction of dreams. So, again, this is not the most positive for readings. The last two side cards I'm going to read together. One points to real-world things that may be affected by the crisis, and the other is kind of a time setting for it. The first card is the Voyage, which shows an 18th century sailing ship on it. The instant I saw it, I just had a flash, this is a psychic flash for you, of cargo ships, and the fact that China makes much of what the world and the West uses these days. It combines with other Asian economies. It's like a huge portion of the world's production, and it all has to be shipped places. I think shipping and cargo and all the related things that go with that is either stops or is greatly affected by what happens. It may be destroyed. It may be part of what is destroyed, at least temporarily. The other thing that came to mind was that China has been working real hard on becoming a sea power and amping up their navy. I know they've been making an artificial island and showing it off, and it's kind of led to some disputes, and they've been showing off their naval ships. This stuff could also be affected by this crisis. Not having enough money will often make a military feel very squeezed. And finally, the slate card that's the time marker is now. It's a card with the word now on it. It also shows a farmer reaping his harvest that he planted in the spring. This card gives us, again, a time marker suggesting the destruction of the crisis will be soon. Though soon can be relative in the case of card energies. I'm recording this, as I said, on December 15th, 2015, so it's kind of any time from this date to, any time before late February is possible. But my hunch is the Chinese will try to hold things together, if they possibly can, until the Chinese New Year celebrations on February 8th. It's their one really big holiday, and they're going to really want to save their face for that time of year, if they can manage it. Even if they do manage to last that long, I would look for things to start seriously starting to implode, or at least the first signs of this, if this forecast is correct, shortly afterwards, and if it doesn't happen before. So that was the side cards, which pretty well tells us what we need to know, but I went on to the Cat's Eye Tarot deck and runes anyway, because they can always give us some more information, and I'd already drawn them up for the other economic blocks, and I wanted to keep the reading consistent. Each block of these readings gets 3 Cat's Eye Tarot cards and 2 runes. So what do the kitties have to tell us about this situation? The first card is the Ace of Wands. This card shows our same kitty, that snake killer, from the reading during the first half of the show, but it's at the start of his battle with the snake. His little orange paw is about to bat the snake's head, as if testing the waters. Now, my husband keeps snakes, and we also have cats. We have to keep them totally separated, because as my husband says, when it comes to cats and snakes, usually the smaller snake, the cat wins. But when you have a snake that gets larger, the cat loses. We don't want either to happen in our house, so we keep them apart. The snake is obviously on this card a rattlesnake, which adds some more danger to it. It could in fact kill the cat with its fangs if it gets a lucky strike. We know, because we've seen the story already, that this cat will eventually win. Then he's still going to be left trying to carry the burden of his victory, and that's something to remember. In this context, this card is all about creative forces, initial bright enthusiasm, confidence, and courage. But there's also, it comes with a really big dose of overconfidence, like young things often have, and a tendency to take on tasks that are too big and too fast. Idea would be good, seemed like a good idea at the time, but we really weren't quite ready to get there. I think it's a rather perfect description of modern China over the last couple of decades, as they sort of force marched and raced themselves from, hardly being on the world stage. Most of my life, China was kind of this big closed country that said a lot of things, but weren't really very active outside of themselves, other than occasionally, funding wars in other countries or something. But generally, they didn't do much. And then they suddenly, in this 20-year period, tried to undo what was really 500 years of basic retreat from the stage when they were an ongoing world empire, and reassert their place that they had held for the previous 5,000 years, which was a really big deal. I mean, in various forms, the Chinese have had an empire for 5,000 years. It's passed around to different groups and everything, but it's been basically the world's oldest continuous civilization. But they took this kind of 500-year break around the time of the European entrance into North America, and like I said, it's like in 20 years they tried to make it all up. This card suggests that while such enthusiasm, creativity, and even all that hard work can take a person or a nation a good place, a good distance, it's possible to get ahead of yourself and not notice the potential for the snake to bite. The next card is Justice. It shows a gray kitty coming to a window with a scale reflected in the background. This card is really simple and echoes the farmer reading on the side card, which said now. Justice means you cannot evade the fact that you are responsible for your actions. The chickens of the past are coming home to roost in the present, whether you like it or not. It is up to the individual, or in this case the nation, to decide how to deal with this outcome, either accepting responsibility and moving forward from there in a thoughtful and well-planned manner, or trying to escape it, pretending it's not happening, and having the consequences follow them anyway. In other words, the snake strikes. This also hints that there will be massive legal messes in the wake of this event, the Justice card itself, including probably obvious things like dealing with bankrupt companies, or maybe some world companies that go bankrupt, as well as just in China. Banks may implode and go under. Show trials of important individuals being China will almost certainly happen. You're going to get some unforeseen things that even I can't predict or see from the cards, but you get, because this is part of the new situation in the world, will also be influencing China, but in general, you're going to see this big wave of legal and judgmental stuff. Also, the nations of the world will be somewhat judging China for how they proceed, both what they have done in the past and how they proceed forward. Now, we've got another card, though. We've got the King of Wands. And he provides this potential way out for the Chinese economy, or at least the Chinese future, probably way past February. I think this is much more of a going into the future card. The energy, as always, can be used for good or ill, but it does strike up a rare positive note in this reading. The keynotes for this card are creativity, bold, inspired, forceful, and charismatic. Bold, in other words, we have the first card in the sequence with the young cat is attempting to kill the snake, which we know he does, but he suffers from trying to do too much too soon. He barely makes it, he manages it, but it's a real struggle. Here we have the same cat grown up to a full tomcat. He's a king now. He no longer has to prove anything to anybody, and he's fully capable of using all that great creative genius potential and that desire to take bold risks in an experienced and balanced way. There is also an enjoyment of being the center of attention, which China really likes and has desperately been trying to regain as it strives to become a world power, again, much as it was during human history. I actually, when I was watching the Olympics a few years ago, the Olympic opening ceremony in China, I described it to my husband, who didn't watch it, as the Chinese do this incredible display that just drums in over and over. For 5,000 years we have been an empire and the most civilized people on earth. We took a 500-year vacation, but by golly, tell the world we're back. And that's the sense that you get from this card. The potential for a good recovery ultimately in the long term is there, but China has to really watch this potential to jump the gun again. If they do that, literally, and they could use military force, then they take both their economy and possibly a lot of the world further down this destructive period. Again, I think this is past our February reading, but the cards don't always recognize the time boundaries we put on them. I've gone in that before, and I think that's kind of this is the choice that China will be making. How do they evoke the king of the orange cats? Finally, we actually get a little bit from the runestones as well, and I think this takes us back more to the present, although it will affect things in the future. The runes are Manage for human partnerships, and we also have Hagalaj, which is a hailstone. Now, human partnerships includes things like treaties, alliances, groupings. It's normally a very positive rune in the sense that it's all about the things that I think China has been trying to do, making treaties, alliances, joining the world as an equal, or in some cases trying to actually become the head of sort of the Asian economies. All that stuff is endangered because the Hagalaj rune, just like, I did a whole show on a Hagalaj rune a few weeks ago. That was more about the one that hit the West. It's a hail strike. It's something that occurs almost out of nowhere, and it changes things. It shatters things. And I believe that first one was the Paris attack. And it was probably also because hail doesn't always fall by itself. I think the downed Russian airliner and the Turks shooting down the Russian the aircraft carrier, not aircraft carrier, the aircraft, that they shot down. Those three were probably combined to make the hail strike, but the big one was Paris. Everybody knew that with that attack, things had changed. Well, this suggests that there's going to be a similar type of changing, crashing event that occurs in the economics of China, and it's probably going to impact or strike against alliances, partnerships, businesses, something to do with united and people being together. I think the hail strike in this case either is the destruction we saw in the first card, or it comes about as the direct results of it. In either case, the hail strike's likely again to shatter those human partnerships, even political and geographic ones, possibly even military treaties, which is really kind of scary, in its wake. It's just, because it's hail, it's just going to hit what it hits, and it's going to shatter what it shatters. This probably is the new situation that confronts the whole world in the next few months. It may not be, we're not sure, but it certainly has that potential. And again, it will of course affect some places more than others, which I think is why the worldwide reading is more sluggish and bogged down. It isn't like there aren't incredible, shocking, or sudden things like there seems to be in China. It's just, but the world has to react to it in the way that different places can. I'm going to look next at the EU because it's shorter for one thing, and it seems to be less impacted, but we do want to look at it. And then we'll finally wind up with the US for our two regions on this reading. Okay, so we looked and we saw this destruction in China. And we know the world kind of bogs down and gets kind of depressing. So let's look and see what's happening in those two other blocks. I'm going to start with the EU, like I said, and we'll see how it goes from here. Like I said, I think it's a little less affected by outside events, the US more so, but I'll give you the rundown and you can make your own decisions on that. Now, the way I framed this reading was, what are the main energies, events, and or outlook for the economic situation in the EU and other associated European countries for the next 2.5 months, or basically mid-December 2015 to the end of February 2016. The first side card in the EU reading is Mother. Now, often in these current events readings, the Mother card can be about a strong female leader, or it can be about a country which is female identified, such as Mother Russia, who we're not reading for right now, but that's Mother Russia and Mother India are the two big ones that people recognize. Or things less obvious like Britannia, which would be the United Kingdom, and to some degree France as well, or La España, Spain. We get these kind of identifications, which is very opposite from a country like, say, Germany, which is the fatherland. Now, it doesn't always follow that this is what it means, but again, it's just kind of a guideline. It's also about nurturing energy, the Mother card is, and the ability to take care of people in a loving and caring way. In other words, to nurture, to be the mother of the country. The country is as nurturing parent. With the next card coming up as Prison, it suggests that somehow this mothering or caring energy that particularly Europeans expect their governments to have, they don't usually actually have them, but there's sort of that expectation there, it becomes trapped, bogged down, and unable to function. Now, I have no idea if this is because of, say, the destruction or the limitations of the world economy that get put on the world economy because it happens in China. But again, just like militaries don't function really well without cash flow, an economic bog down would affect the ability to deliver social services throughout Europe. This can also be about the actual female leaders in the EU, of which we have a number. Even in the father-identified country of Germany, we have Angela Merkel, and she was actually exactly one of the people I thought of when I saw this card. You also get like ceremonial figureheads like the Queen of England, and I know there's been a lot of discussion in England about the ability to provide services for people. But I think it's going to seem like kind of a harsh period, I think, is kind of what I'm getting at. I suspect that the trapped prison card, again, is about that fallout of Chinese destruction. And it's just kind of locking economies down all over the world to a degree. Some more, some less. But the next card is fortune. And we get with this the concept of imprisoned fortunes or imprisoned wealth that can't go anywhere. In other words, this idea of trapped money or trapped wealth. Fortune also, of course, can be about luck. So it's also your luck is kind of trapped. You're just kind of stuck. As always, this may manifest in more than one way. And we may also actually see like wealthy people or bankers or different politicians in prison, as well as great fortunes simply being held hostage and stuck in place. You know, they can't really be invested anywhere. Maybe this would also be what you would expect to see if there was, say, a bank holiday or a lockdown on banks. People can't access their fortunes. Again, it goes with the world reading of this just kind of stuck and bogged down. Only in the case of the EU, it's more like a wall crashing down as opposed to mudslogging through. The last two side cards are yes and union. And the union card in an EU reading is almost always the economic union of the EU itself. It doesn't have to be, but I think in this case it's yes, this is the EU. I suspect it also means that while things may get bogged down again and just contraction and moving, the EU itself is not going to self-destruct during this time period. I know there's a lot of talk about that. It may happen later. But it's going to freeze a lot of it, and a lot of its bureaucracy and whatever are going to become kind of ineffective. This could also, and I'll go into this more later, but this could also be about the weather. I mean, some of this, this is wintertime up here where I live, and it's, things may just kind of freeze over, and it's all going to be this kind of sense of frozen stagnation. The Kansai Tarot gives us another hint of what the EU is going through. In fact, that it has other big problems on its hands, apart from just the financial stagnation, and perhaps an inability to care for its citizens as a welcoming mother might want. First, all three cards are swords. And while swords are powerful and useful weapons, they're also sharp and can cut really deeply. There are very few motherly or nurturing or comforting soft edges to swords, or sword cards. They have a message. They cut through anything soft until they hit right to the bone of the matter. This can be a good thing, but can also sometimes be a rather harsh thing. The first card this time is the King of Swords. We get the King first. He's a large and dignified Siamese tomcat who comes and goes where he pleases. He's pictured in the cat door. He demands respect, but is known for his intelligent, just, and articulate nature, and his ability to make decisions based on analysis of a situation rather than emotions. Total opposite of the mother card here. We have great ability, but almost no feeling. In fact, when dealing with this tomcat, emotional appeals are likely to backfire. You make your case with logic, you reason it out if you want to go places with this guy. Or you want to go forward when the energy is like this. A rather good card, I think, given the situation in the EU, but it suggests the problems, including things like the flood of immigration and the economic problems of trapped and slowed money, and, problems like Greece, which have not actually gone away. They've just kind of fallen out of the headlines. All this stuff is not going to be solved by emotionally reacting to it, but only can be dealt with clear and sharp thinking, or at least that's going to be the mood. The second card is the Two of Swords. This card has two young Siamese cats who are pretending to ignore each other. And even though they both know they're in the same room, they pretend they're not. If you've got cats, multiple cats, you know this. They do this. Our joke in our household, there is no other cat there, even if the other cat's like an inch away. The key words for these cards then are like stalemate, blocked emotions, avoidance, ignoring, just pretending, and some degree pretense. A good part of this card energy is about accepting that there are some issues that will have to be retreated from, or some people that have to be retreated from, or cats, for that matter. The situations will have to be solved eventually, because they're not going to go away. But a staged retreat right now may be the best solution for now. Don't confront it headlong. These two young cats don't really want to fight. They're probably new to each other. They're new to the household. They're still unsure of each other. So they're pretending that the other one isn't there in hopes that they can get away with getting through the day. It's likely that a number of key EU goals and demands will have to simply be put on hold for the next few months. Well, the hands-on issues confronting the situation that they have to deal with are going to be required. I think this is going to be a combination of having to drop some things the EU has been really pushing for a long time. Probably their real intense desire, I could guess, to be like the United States of Europe. I don't think that the mood is there for that. I also think there may have to be some compromises made on people coming on the whole immigration thing. It will have to be dealt with, but I think that there may be a tendency to shy away from actually hitting things head on during this period. We're only going through February, and again, it's winter when things are largely shut down, so that may sort of feel like it gives them a breathing space. I don't know. Those are kind of non-psychic guesses as to what this may be about. Now, I really think there's going to be issues involving the EU currency, banking, and such that will also be ignored during this time, or at least as long as they can ignore them. All that stuff, they're going to put things on hold they wanted to do and hope the other stuff just nobody notices. But remember, we do have that, there is a possibility for things to really get stuck, but we've already gone over that. Finally, we've got the Four of Swords. Now, this is the cat. He's kind of resting on a tree. He isn't quite asleep, but he isn't doing much either. This card indicates a time of rest, retreat, recuperation is needed. And again, I think to suggest that during the depth of this winter, not much progress forward can be made on the EU front in much of anything. There is both a intentional kind of retreat from that which really needs to be dealt with but can't right now, as well as a real need for retreat from a forced retreat, a forced rest period. And I also have to wonder again if the weather and other usual winter types of problems are going to force a certain amount of this resting in place for the economy and the public. There also will probably be some effects on travel I'll get to later. But my prediction for this would be, and so far it's been a rather harsh winter in a lot of places that just kind of, closes things down, both mentally and spiritually, as well as physically. People just don't, when it's cold and dark and damp and there's 6 feet of snow on the ground, people don't want to, or pouring rain, people don't get enthusiastic to do things. They just do what they have to get by, and that's kind of it. Because we now have the runes, and we have the elk or protective rune that we've gone into before, and we also have Rhytho, which is the rune for travel and communications. The Elk Rune, as I said before, is usually protective, but being a very large animal, grown elk fear very little, which is why they tend not to notice human interventions like cars, or even human interventions for that matter, unless it's actually in some way, getting on the elk's nerves, or a problem. So on the one hand, this rune promises some protection like it did in the other readings, but perhaps also a need for protection while traveling. Again, I suspect this may be weather-related. Some of it could be terror or just mechanical, but it feels kind of weather-related. But also, elk are a creature that, or you see in the winter a lot. But they can be protected when standing still, as I said before. But again, if that herd spooks and starts running, there's no real way to stop them until they decide to stop or they run right off a cliff. This set of runes is the strongest amount of potential movement we have seen in this financial reading. And it sort of goes against that muddy, soggy, stuck situation in the overall rune reading and even a lot of the European reading. So there's a potential for, in the EU, by the end of things, for this sort of runaway market inflation, or even, it could be a bank run, and that might actually be the most likely, this sort of bank run situation. But there's also the ideal for, or the potential for protection of the same thing. So you have this kind of push-pull again. Individuals can concentrate on claiming this protection from whatever is moving around out there. I'm not sure overall what the European economy itself is going to do in this context, but if it's lucky, the protective aspects of the Elk Rune will win out at least for a time, or perhaps at least the weather will make things kind of stop and slow down and keep things from getting out of control. The Rhytho rune, which I accidentally wrote down in my notes as radio rune, which is really funny because it's close to our word for radio. It suggests, again, that travel and transportation may be affected during this period, as well as phones, computers, internet services. Anything we associate with communication or travel is going to just have issues. And this could even spread into, could be weather, or it could become political, economic, again, or even terror-related or war-related issues. But it's definitely there. On the other hand, this could also be a time when we might see discoveries in this field. So that could be a bit of bright news. Perhaps out of the EU will come some new ideas and new technology on the communications front. All in all, not nearly as dire a situation as China seems to be, but the EU is going to have to pull a lot of old plans and ideas on hold. It's great wealth of both individuals but also corporations or nations even. They kind of get trapped and bogged down and stagnate with the rest of the world at this time. Again, think of possibly even closed bank accounts. It's a system that gets frozen. Everything seems frozen in this reading for the EU. I think, frozen is probably your best theme term for this. And without money, governments become unable to care for their people as they might like to, or with less money. Look for female leaders to have some big issues on their hands to deal with as well. Overall, a rather sharp and cutting and non-nurturing time period when things can be painful, but on the other hand, sometimes you need to cut some stuff in order for, if you've got an infection, you got to cut it out, and in order for the healing to start. So that's hopefully maybe some of that's what's going on here. But that is, in fact, that kind of wraps up the EU. And that leaves us for our next and final reading, which will be on the United States. And now, finally, we get to the United States. Well, Europe appears only indirectly affected by the stranger or new developments in the world. Partly, but potentially a lot of it coming out of China. The U.S. is having other issues. Some are homegrown, I think, and some are directly related to the economic, what's probably going to be an economic crisis in Asia and beyond. The way I phrased this again was pretty much like the others, which was, what are the main energies, events, and or outlook for the economic situation in the United States for the next 2.5 months, or mid-December 2015 to the end of February 2016. This very first card in this reading is the Liar. This isn't quite as bad as Destruction, but you really don't want to see this at the start of a reading like this. It suggests that someone is lying, or that something is false, or not what it appears to be. The foundations are false of something. They're just wrong. This is a pretty dire and economic reading, actually. Again, not as bad as Destruction, but it isn't really a good sign. Again, as I said, something's either false or lied about. There is an element of distraction in this card as well. The jester on the card holds a puppet, trying to keep the audience from seeing what is taking place in a veiled area behind the stage. In some ways, that's one of the more disturbing aspects, because it suggests that not only are something false, but it's being hidden from someone, or in this case, probably the public. The second card is once again the Cave, which, there really are 40 cards in these decks. The cards are really targeting what the situation is. And this time I think it literally indicates an economic depression or recession, as well as the same tendency to withdraw, retreat, and stay away from the rest of the world as we've seen in the other readings. I suspect that the lying is really about the economic situation, that as long as possible, the people will be lied to. That's already been ongoing, so that's no big revelation here. But because it's being flagged first, I think it's going to be a big topic, a big energy for the next few months. Almost certainly, at the very least, the suggested efforts by the U.S. government to try and hide the scale of these economic problems, including stagnation and depression, are going to continue through this time period. This will likely create a sense of gloom and hopelessness on the part of at least a portion of the public. The last three cards, they just need to be taken together. And this has been a kind of a long slog show, so I'm going to just do that. The cards are the Message, which makes everything in the reading stronger. It's in the middle, so it like emphasizes the cards on both sides, like this is the message, stupid. But the other cards on the other side of it are never and fortune. Again, there's lots of cards in this deck, but they show up again. I don't think this means the U.S. will never, and this card has never on it. We had the no card before, this time we get never. But it doesn't mean we'll never have any good fortune again in the U.S. or that they'll never crawl out of the depression cave. But as I tell my clients, when the never card shows up, it often feels like something is never going to change. It goes on for a really long time. And there's also a lot of blocking negative energy. I think there's both here. There's a longer time scale before things improve than people would want to believe or are being told. And there's a lot of blocking energy that means that at the moment, fortune is never happening or fortune is blocked in some way. At least not in the way things are going right now. This is not the way to prosper. This is not the way to unlock fortune, both either in terms of luck or in terms of wealth and money. The Liar card suggests that everything about the U.S. situation has to be taken with a grain of salt until the energies move a bit and we get some cards or some energies that expose the lies and lead to greater awareness on how to move forward. Now let's see if the kitty cards give us a little more information on that, because that's kind of stark and unfortunate. But again, fortunately, it's only a 2.5 month period. But it shows the U.S. version of the same sort of stagnation you're seeing everywhere else, but except China, where it's really explosive. But it's being presented falsely. There's an attempt to try to cover it up. The Cat's Eye Tarot cards mirror this pathway, that they do in sort of a more hopeful way and give us a glimpse of the way forward here. For now, we have the Ten of Wands again. That's right, we got the same young kitty who slain his snake and now finds it way too heavy to carry up the stairs. This suggests the U.S. economy also has taken on more burdens, or the U.S. itself, than it can possibly carry. That has a long way to go before it can make it up the steps, and it may have to drop some of what it views as its hard-won gains, or even the fruits of its victory, in other words, the snake, in order to gain access to the top of the stairs, which is the ultimate goal here. It may not be able to get through everything with what it once had. It doesn't mean it won't either, but there's going to be some hard choices along the way. The Hermit card, now this is a different one. It shows an elderly lone cat, pretty little black cat, who waits in an alley for his chosen human to bring him a food dish. He walks by himself. He has sort of the scars of a long life, but he's still kind of cute. He enjoys companionship on his own terms, but he will not tolerate others just to have them around. In other words, he's an old wise street guy, and yeah, he can use that cute to make somebody pet him, but if he's not interested in you, he's not going there. He's partly about seeking spiritual guidance and introspection, like a hermit in any deck, but he's also the good side of the Cade card. This idea of staging an intentional withdrawal to take stock before making a decision. In other words, think about things. Ponder things. Make wise choices. And do some of them alone. Don't rely on mass information. My strong feeling here is this card in the U.S., and to a lesser degree the Two of Cards sword in Europe, highlight a popular move towards isolationism. Potentially nationalism and a desire on the part of many people to fix what's at home and ignore the rest of the world as much as possible. Isolationism is literally a two-edged sword, because on the one hand, it means focusing in the proper way on what you need to look at where you are, as opposed to trying to solve everybody else's problems. But it can also become very intrusive, and then it becomes the withdrawal into the cave. So this is the more positive aspect if people choose to use it that way. On economic trends, if these feelings continue past the winter period, which is, as I've said, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, everywhere we've read about is in the Northern Hemisphere, so it's all winter, where it's kind of cold and there's a tendency to want to withdraw. Anyway, but if these feelings continue past this period, it's likely to result eventually in measures like we've seen in the past in the 19th century during periods of, or the 1920s in the U.S., where I think people went more inward. Things like tariffs on foreign goods, currency controls, border controls. I think there'll be an attempt to control money to a much greater degree. This will probably be done in the name of national security or whatever, but it will be, it'll be just a lockdown on a lot of stuff. And a general distrust of all things different or foreign, which again, so for trends, you can look at, on the good side, you can look at a revival in home crafting and, making do with what we've got and, American ingenuity. On the flip side, you could probably see a lot more hostility towards people that are more recent immigrants and other people and things that are different and possibly, things that are perceived as threats or something from the outside out there. I don't think it means Mexican restaurants are going to go away, but it just means in general there'll be this popular feeling for things that are traditional and local and perceived as being part of the larger culture. Look for populist calls to return to manufacturing, which could be a good thing, and other long-gone industries that have left the U.S. This probably here is where these trends are going to run counter to what the large corporations want, and over the winter, they're likely to try to continue to paint this distracting picture that things are fine, so people will quit calling for this, as pretense that America has only a 5% unemployment rate when really it's about 25%, but I think there's going to be a growing tension there. Now, the last cat's eye tarot deck, interestingly enough, is the Wheel of Fortune. We get fortune again. It also includes the Wheel of Fate, the Wheel of Cycles, the Wheel of Karma, is all in there, but it's primarily the Wheel of Fortune or Fate. In this deck, it's a wagon wheel with cats on it, and one kitty, she's hunting a bird, and another cat's looking for mice under the wagon. These are wealth in the cat world, so, it's kind of, the wheels are turning and things are moving, and we're chasing after things that are just a little bit beyond our reach here. The card tells us part of what is going on in the U.S. economic world is probably or definitely part of a larger cycle. I think it really is part of a larger economic cycle, one that has already started turning, and it can't be stopped any longer. I mean, we've seen this in other readings in this past year, this concept of the wheel is turning and it's just not going to stop till it's ready, just like those elk are not going to stop running till they're ready. Here it is. It's running. This cycle won't be exactly like other large historical cycles, because they never are, but it's probably going to be similar. Exactly how that fate's going to play out, we don't quite know yet, but one thing is certain, that the U.S. is heading down the road towards it. And my guess would be, we're probably looking at something like the depressive boom and bust cycles of the 1920s going into the 1930s. But we've already run through that a little bit, so maybe not. There are other cycles this could be echoing. We just need to keep our eyes open. But in the next couple of months, I think we're going to start seeing the first glimpses of definitely what is happening. Okay, finally, and last but not least, we have our last two runes, and for this show and for the U.S. And these runes are Fehu, which means cattle, wealth, gold, and fortune, followed by Awash, the yew tree. Now, we've had the Fehu rune has shown up before, and it's basically the wealth card. It's similar to fortune or money, but it literally means cattle in the Norse. It's also gold and sexuality and a lot of things. And my husband's been known to say that the entire Rheingold cycle, all the fighting and everything, can be just summed up. It's like 8 hours of demonstrating the Fehu rune, because you have money, sex, violence, and all this stuff going on about gold. So, there are really good elements in this rune, but there's also this potential for violence and conflict and just real craziness over money and wealth. So we've got that. We've also got the yew tree, which is the everlasting evergreen tree. It's often planted in graveyards in Europe. It's extremely tall. It's a very dramatic tree. It's amazing to look at. And they live for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years, which is why they're associated with eternal life. You can go to medieval graveyards today and see yew trees that were planted there. But the thing is, it also has a poison in it that can make a person ill if they sit too long under its branches. So it's the tree of life and the tree of death. It's a tree that bridges these worlds. between the living and the dead. And standing next to Fehu, it suggests there may be a time when some things are both destroyed and other things are reborn in new ways. It's almost like the destruction and the rebirth of money. Again, I don't think that happens in the next 2 months. I think that this is kind of a cycle hinted at in the Wheel of Kitty Fortune. This is a cycle that's turning. I don't think we get there in 2.5 months, but I think the runes are projecting forward. I don't think this last part, again, is, but I think it's going to go on for at least 6 months before we really see, the full expression of this or the definite way forward. But we're going to get there. Part of this, I think, is going to come from the fallout in China. And part of it's going to be the direct result of the lies or false foundation that was underpinning the economy when this period started, and probably has been ongoing for a long time. My hunch is that while we're going to see a lot of very difficult economic issues coloring next year's energy forecast, this at least, this at least gives us some insight into what dust settles about. I won't be certain if a major trend in 2016 is economic stuff until I do my overall trends reading for 2016. But I'll be really surprised if there isn't a hint of it in there, because it sure looks like it's an ongoing one to me. Okay, well then, that was an intense and interesting look. I don't want to be totally down on this, because again, there's a lot of lessons individuals can take from this to make it more positive. But remember, during a period like this, what you want to do is hold what you have. Don't try to overdo or take risks. The safe and true is better than the bright and new. And if you kind of can go with that and be a little conservative with your spending if you can, and just be careful, make some preparations so that you can, enjoy yourself. I think you can probably sit back and just kind of watch the world as it goes by and hopefully not have to worry as much. That's the best advice I can give at this time. We'll probably take another look at some other areas in a few weeks and, maybe again in March when it's spring and see how things may have morphed or changed. I think we'll all know when that Hagelage hits China, and we'll be watching for that. And I'll probably do an update when I see that, just like I've done the update for Europe for the previous Hagelage tonight. But I think that's enough for this evening, enough for us all to think on. I certainly have had enough to think on today. So I'm going to leave everybody with that. And again, I'm not sure if I'll be back next week, being that we're getting close to the actual holidays. But I will try to be back in the next couple of weeks at least for another visit with Cat's Eye on the Future. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.